Hey, everybody at home. I want to let you know that I am sitting with the most impressive person I have ever met in the Bigfoot community, known as Thomas Steenberg. And he is a bit of a whiz when it comes to data, and his capacity to data collect is a great example for all of us exactly how to interview people and expand on when you're doing out an area. But just kind of before we get going, I'm going to share a little quick video with everybody at home there just to give them an idea about who you are, Thomas, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Just give me a second here to set that up. And
Leon Thompson production.
Everybody, I'm actually with Thomas Steenberg right now. Thomas is an encyclopedia of Bigfoot Sasquatch history.
Figure the creature she was looking at right in behind these trees.
Oh, it was called. It's also known as the Playboy because the main girl was Lisa Marie Goodart, who was Miss Centerfold 1984, and she was hosting.
You guys catch that at home?
I've never been able to find a copy of the Playboy because I always like to have a picture of the witness for the file.
Where a so-called young Sasquatch was supposedly captured by railway workers when they were building the Trans-Canada Railway in 1884. And she looked out and she didn't see a cow, she saw this figure coming out of it. Because it seemed to be malingering in the tree line.
And then when I said to you, I've seen a coyote do that same sound, the first thing you said to me was, did you get a video of it?
Sasquatch found number 10203, in other words, 203 C inches, yeah. That was January 28, 2017.
Thank you, DJ Crew, for Bosworth Cripple, Merritt. Pretty sure years ago, 2016, Dina River Track, from Titmus.
Okay, there's no way.
There you go.
By the way, you had it labeled as silver flat.
Yeah, I know.
Flat. Too high-tech whiz.
Yeah. Well, this is us practice for the seniors, like I was saying. Like when you saw that interview I did with Alex from Sasquatch Out of the Shadows there, I just brutalized First Nations language totally. And so you feel free to correct me in any way.
Oh, tell me, half the time I can't pronounce the words, like every one of them's got 40 letters in it.
Yeah, and where's the influxes?
Yeah.
How do you do the thing?
Yeah.
Thomas, can you kind of share with the people at home how you kind of got involved and how long you've been doing this for?
Well, I've been fascinated by the Sasquatch mystery ever since I was old enough to read. I mean, we're going back when I was a wee lad in the mid-1960s. My parents brought home a hardcover Reader Digest book for education purpose for me and my sister, who's 2 years younger than I am. And that book had chapters on everything you can think of: tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanoes. And of course, as usual, they had the big section on the age of the dinosaurs with the beautiful color paintings, of T-Rex standing straight up, dragging his tail on the ground, something they know that didn't happen back then. And right in the middle of that dinosaur section was a little 2-page article with 3 fuzzy black and white photographs called The Thing in Loch Ness.
Right.
I don't know. It's like a button click because I read that about 80 times. And I pestered my parents. They ended up getting me a library card, and of course, going to the library and getting books on cryptozoology. And I don't even think that term was in use then. I started reading to find out more about the Loch Ness Monster. I started reading about this thing in Western Canada called the Sasquatch, and the Americans call it Bigfoot. By the way, you need to change Bigfoot Okanagan to Sasquatch Okanagan. But I think what really did it was not too long after that on a school night when I should have been in bed, I came walking downstairs. My parents were in the living room watching a movie on the old black and white TV. And I fully expected to get a blast from my father, you know, hey, boy, you should be upstairs. What are you doing? That kind of thing.
Yep.
But he didn't. He said, you know, the lad's interested in this kind of thing. Maybe we should let him watch it. My mother said, oh, no, he can't watch this. He'll have bad dreams or something along that line. But my father won the argument, and I guess he's regretted that ever since. And what was playing was that old Hammer horror film starring Peter Cushing, The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas.
Yeah, I remember it.
It was Sasquatch from that day on, and that's all I basically thought about and read and tried to read about. I annoyed the hell out of my teachers in the school with it. But when I did a presentation on it, I got one teacher gave me 110 out of 100 on it and asked me to present it to other classrooms. And I joined the Army because it was my ticket out west, because I was in Ontario at the time. And at that time, I naturally thought of the Sasquatch as a West Coast phenomenon. Yeah, I'd never really heard of anything in Ontario except around Cobalt, where they had a rash of incidents over a 3-decade period of an animal that was locally known as Old Yellow Top. But when I moved out west with the Army, I took one look at the Rocky Mountains, having seen them for the first time in my life, and saying to myself, well, you know, there's no boundary or wall built between British Columbia and Alberta. If they've been seen in eastern BC, they have to be seen here too. So I decided to put an ad in the local press, and it was very simple. Sasquatch. Anyone who believes they may have had a sight of this creature, please call Thomas Steenberg and the phone number. And I didn't expect much result, but oh, hell, my phone was ringing almost on a daily basis.
Wow.
And that's where I first got introduced to the late Professor Vladimir Markotic, who was a professor of archaeology and anthropology at the University of Calgary. He invited me to meet with him, and I think my knowledge of the subject then impressed him enough that we sort of became unofficial partners. He did the academic stuff, and I did the field research, because he was a senior citizen then, too. He was already in his late 70s. And it was through Vladimir that I eventually met the late Grover Krantz, you know, and made contact with him. I met, of course, and became good friends with the late John Green for many years, and Bob Titmus, and the late René de Hinden. Okay, all the original Four Horsemen I knew and did a lot of research with, all except Peter Byrne, who I never met face to face until 2010.
Right.
And we exchanged letters and stuff like that, but I have to admit I kind of avoided it because it was well known that John Green couldn't stand him. So and John was very well known for saying, if anyone does anything with Peter Burns, they'll never do anything with me. So I kept Peter in the closet, so to speak. And of course, Renee, he was always pestering me about what everyone else was saying, because I always like to say one of my achievements in this was being able to be friends and do research with all these guys and not get sucked into their personal wars and disagreements, because you couldn't get these guys in the same room together. Mm-hmm. You know, and
not much has changed.
Not much has changed, yeah. But for some reason, and they didn't do it with hardly anyone else. They knew I was seeing the other guys doing work with the other guys, but none of them held it against me. Mm. And like Rennie was always saying, "So what does that Titmus say about this or that?" You know, and I just simply say, well, Randy, I'm not going to tell you. I didn't tell him what you said. I'm not going to tell you what he said, you know. And he didn't like it, but he accepted it. And he never held it against me. And I know he held it against a lot of other people, but not me. I don't know why. I mean,
and in those...
Well, you've heard me say this. I love the late René de Hinden, and I like to think he loved me sometimes.
And back in the old days, Thomas, in the old days, what was the view on Sasquatch with those guys?
They were all zoological. All of them. If the Sasquatch does indeed exist, it's probably an animal, a primate, and they were all in that camp. We tend to, well, I use the term now, inmates running the asylum. Back then, they used to call them the lunatic fringe. You know, people go out on wild stories about the fourth dimension and spiritualism and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And we didn't want to be people who just like that, because as far as we were concerned, all they are they're chasing their tails. Mm. They're trying to answer a mystery by invoking another mystery and then bringing in a third mystery. Yeah. And we always felt that if the Sasquatch exists, it's a creature of flesh and blood. It's always been here. And hopefully it always will be. Because I don't think they're as rare as some people think, but I don't think there's a great many of them either. And let's face it, they're the world champion hide and seekers. So when you did your first investigation, was it with those guys specifically? Oh no, before I even met them, I did 4 or 5 years just doing stuff on my own. And could you tell me a little bit about the first call that kind of came in for you? Oh, geez, I don't even remember. I think the first one I really looked into in Alberta, it was an Australian tourist who was driving the 1A highway through the Indian reservation, before you get to Canmore on the Trans-Canada Highway. But he was on the 1A, the old highway. Mm. And he called up to say he saw what he thought was an orangutan crossing the road. Hmm. That was the first thing that popped in his head, orangutan. Hmm. And it wasn't until he started asking questions about it, he heard about this strange creature. He'd never heard of the Sasquatch or Bigfoot. He had heard of the Yeti and the Paul, but he had never heard that. He was a tourist. He said, and his words was a great big bloody orangutan. Hmm. And he showed me where it happened, and I was fascinated. You could see scalp marks in the bank where something had climbed, but they were not discernible footprints. And he was so convinced that it was orangutan, except it was walking upright. Mm. That's what it reminded him of. And he didn't see it for very long. He just slammed on the brakes of a rental car he was driving and watched it disappear over the bank, and it was gone. Mm. Yeah. And when you, like on that little quick video I showed of you, one of the things that I've really admired about you has been the way you systematically kind of look at things objectively. And also when you're interviewing people, the way you interview people, you have I think you had talked to me about you have a personal questionnaire, I think, that you did up. Is that correct? Yes. And how many questions roughly do you have on that? Well, I think there are about 45 questions on it. And I've added to it over the years if I think of other things to say, and I've rearranged things. I basically have used the same questionnaire from the beginning. My philosophy from the beginning has always been stick to the facts, never deviate from the facts, and don't go off into wild speculation, right? When you interview a witness, you have to look at it as almost like in a police investigation. Right, yep. To me, it's... you don't ask leading questions. You let the witness answer it in their own way, in their own words. And when I tried to write them down, and I had horrible arguments with the publishers, first Western and later on Hancock House Publishers, because when I published the books and I gave written transcripts of the interview for the books, they wanted me to clean up the grammar. I said, well, no, that's not what they said. I mean, I'm not interviewing Christopher Hitchens every time here, this is the way they said it, I think. And I won out in the end. And I think it was the right call, because you get a better idea who you're dealing with when you see what they said word for word. Ums and ahs all, put in where they are. The squaring, everything. Try to clean up a little bit, like symbols rather than the words, but yeah. Right. Yeah. And I noticed on your new, like you're starting a new kind of angle online on YouTube, and the link you guys will be below here. And because what you've been doing is, when I came and visited you a few years ago, you have all these cassettes of all these people that you had interviewed.
And of course, cassettes. Some of the younger folk are, what's a cassette? Well, they're little plastic things like this. They always get stuck inside of your vehicle when you're listening to them, as they unwound inside of your radio or your tape player. But one of the things I liked about what you're doing now is because you're doing exactly that same strategy, is you're just reading exactly the way the wording is with the same inflection that you heard on the tape, because you're using the transcripts, because the tapes are not that good of quality, because some of those are got to be, what, 30 years old tapes?
Yeah, 30, 35 years old, most of them. And of course, cassette tapes deteriorate with time. But I have to admit, when I started, there was no internet or anything like that. So I never had them with the idea that they would be published someday. I had no idea. So what I've done on YouTube, you notice on some of them, I've read the transcripts, but then I also post the actual interview if people actually want to try and listen to it. So, I'm not making this up. I'm saying exactly what they said, word for word. They're not all like that. Some of them are, and there's going to be more put on my YouTube site as time goes by, that reading the transcript's not necessary. They're very readable, but the early ones, it was like, I didn't like to be rude to people. So if they had their TV blasting in the background or something, I wouldn't ask them to turn it off. Right. Like I did Ralph and Jennifer Bob, who had their sighting in 1973. When I went to interview her, the most annoying thing about that interview is you hear the Steve Martin movie, The Jerk, in the background, and talk almost as loudly as she is, because I didn't want to be rude and ask her to turn her television off. She did eventually do it on her own, but it's kind of funny. You're listening to that serious talk, and how tall do you think? 7, 8 feet, and you see Martin, oh, wow, he really hates these cans. In the background. But it's that kind of thing. You didn't want to be rude to people or assume too much. I stopped doing that as time went by. I like to meet witnesses someplace quiet, either their residence or mine, or someplace nice and quiet where there's not a lot of background noise. Most times they want to meet in a coffee shop or something somewhere. Well, first annoying thing about that's the overhead music they're playing. They're not going to turn it off for you. So, right. And things like that, and everyone clinking and clanking in the background. And the Mike McDonald interview, which I've been in, I interviewed him right at a table at the Sasquatch Symposium we had at the Planetarium in '97. You're actually hearing Rennie DeHinden and Scott Harriet joking with each other in the background because they were standing 10 feet away listening to all that. As I was interviewing him. So, yeah. So people probably got a kick out of that. But
Well, one of the interesting tapes you had talked to me about when I was visiting you was that one with I think it was a sheriff who went to, this was in the States. Help me if I'm wrong on this one, but I think you were talking about how there was a Sasquatch report that came in, and he was radioing in back. There
was a series of reports going in. It happened in the Lummi Reserve in Washington, which is just south of the border here, and it happened in 1975. It was a series of incidents. This has gone on in the Lummi Reserve quite often. You have years where there's no sightings, and all of a sudden, for a period, they get a dozen or so, almost as something. One has come into the area, hung around for a while, and then moved on. And what happened in 1975 is he was Deputy Sheriff Kenny Cooper, and he changed his name later on. He's passed away now, unfortunately, but Kenny Cooper, he changed his name to his Lummi name, and again, it was something with 40 letters in it. I couldn't begin to pronounce it, so I'll just continue to call him Deputy Sheriff Kenny Cooper of the Lummi Police Force. Was responding to a prowler call. Was a lady saw something in her backyard, and as he was going down the road, they didn't actually see the animal emit the noises, but when the animal disappeared as he was driving down the road, he could hear the noises coming from the trees just not too long after they lost sight of it. And he had the presence of mind to pull over and contact the headquarters, and they recorded it over the police mic on what was known back then as a dictaphone. You may remember those. Anyone younger than 50 will not remember what those were. was a dictaphone, which is just a way of recording telephone conversations back in the good old days. You know, and it was right over the police mic. So the sound went through the police mic, over the radio waves, into the police station radio, and was recorded on a dictaphone.
Mm.
But they're the most famous or the most intriguing alleged Sasquatch screen recordings that I have ever heard. And I still wonder about. Yeah.
And how clear were those on the tape? Like, are they still fairly clear?
They're not. I can play it for you right now if you like.
Well, if you got it handy, that'd be awesome.
Let's see if I got this right and I got it in the right position. If you can hear it. My little Sony, I even got a digital recorder now, so I don't use a tape recorder anymore. Getting right into modern times, I am. Yeah. Okay, let's see if this will work for you. Volume way up.
So that's through two different receiving mics, isn't it?
Yeah, the police mic in the car, the radio receiver at the station, and the dictaphone.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine what it sounded like to his ears, but he never forgot it.
Hmm.
Yeah. And again, it's the only one I know of other than the so-called Sierra sounds where somebody thought they saw a Sasquatch just before the sounds were recorded. But again, even in this case, they weren't looking at the animal at the moment it made those sounds.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like to get you online a few times because you just have way too much stuff that I know, unfortunately, that the viewers don't know. So my brain's going about 15 different angles that we could definitely talk about and stuff. You've written like four books now, is that correct?
I've written 3 myself and co-authored 2 others, total of 5.
And what's the latest one that was you got revised that you just put out?
Oh, that was the first book. The Sasquatch in Alberta was republished in 2018 as The Sasquatch in Alberta. And there was some updates added to the back of it. That because, yeah, I wrote that book in 1990. So, and I stayed in Alberta another good number of years. I didn't leave Alberta until 2002. So, but I continued to investigate. And even after that, I still hear about things. So Hancock House thought it'd be a good idea to update the book and republish it. And I did.
Nice. There'll be a link below for that here as well for you guys at home. I highly advise you to check it out. And Thomas, because you have been here for so long on the Bigfoot scene and stuff, you started getting into being asked to do a variety of documentaries and different TV shows and stuff like that. Would you just mind sharing a bit about some of the interesting shows you've been on and documentaries?
Oh, Monster Quest. I was on Monster Quest twice. On the Road Again, a Canadian documentary series here. I was on that program. Creepy Canada, I was a guest on one of their episodes. A lot of American documentaries that I've never even had the opportunity to see because I don't have cable TV. I gave up cable TV in the year 2000 because I didn't like their package system and they were charging me too much. And I'm not spending $80 a month to watch commercials 50% of the time. They could pay me to watch their commercials. And I've stuck to that because I'm too pig-headed. But, yeah, a lot of them, matter of fact, Thursday, there's a group from Omni Films that wants to start preparation for a documentary. I'll be going out with them the last Thursday of this month, and so it continues. Mm-hmm. And
did Searching for Bigfoot, did they come up to Mission, to your area there, and you kind of helped that show out a little bit with Bo?
Yeah, well, in 2016 they were up here doing the episode of Which is Squatchier, British Columbia or Washington, remember? Mm-hmm. And Cliff and Matt Moneymaker came up here, where it was Bobo and Renee, the lady Renee, stayed in Washington. There's a reason why they did that, but I don't think I should go into that. because James Fay's kind of a friend of mine. I don't know if I'm embarrass him or not.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's a reason he stayed in Washington, and they came up here, and I don't know. Most of the people in that town hall meeting were people that I from my files I asked to help them. But again, they do things on that show because people forget it's a show, right? And they do things on that show they never do in real life in their own research, but they do it because the audience demands it. I mean, if they did a documentary the way I think it should be done, it probably wouldn't last more than one season because the general population would find it awful boring, right? So they do things like that sighting at Weaver Lake there that they did. The two people from my files I asked to join. It shows Matt and Cliff on a speedboat in Harrison Lake, and then they pull up to the dock on Weaver Lake. Well, they couldn't have done that unless they portaged that boat over 2 kilometers of mountains and rocks. Why do you do that? And then they made the statement they were the first researchers, investigative team ever to do research on the Chehalis Reserve. And I thought, well, what have I been doing here for 40 years? And what was John Green doing for 20 years before me and Renee? You know, we were all there 100 times. They had the nerve to say on that program that they were the first ever to do any research on the Chehalis Reserve or Chehalis Reserve. I said, no, you weren't. You know, but it's a show. It's a show, and it's for entertainment. And their biggest priority is getting enough audience to justify another season. So and ever since the Blair Witch Project, that genre of sticking a camera in your face and running through the trees and looking scared, that's just what the general audience, especially in the United States, wants to see. You know, if they had me talking about statistics and stuff in front of the camera and looking for tracks along a creek bed, well, you can't do that 12 episodes every year and expect to maintain public interest. Right. But I will give them credit for finding Bigfoot, at least the cast. They won't participate in any absolute hoaxing. The first season, some of the people in the background, some of the people behind the camera were doing things to make the episode more exciting. And they put their foot down and said, we're not doing that ever again. And I believe some people were actually fired. So trying to make things happen that weren't happening. You know what I mean? And to the cast's credit, they put their foot down and said, well, no, we're not participating in anything like that. No hoaxing. But I got to admit, some of their conclusions, I just scratched my head on, because like one episode somewhere in the east with 2 ladies driving by, and they thought they saw this thing standing in the trees. And Bob was standing in the spot trying to say it was probably a real Sasquatch, and yet I could see the mark on the tree over his right shoulder that they were actually looking at. There it is. That's what you see. It only looked like it was moving because the car is moving, and they had an old VCR camera that the quality wasn't all that great. Oh yeah. I could see what the explanation was, but they couldn't. I don't understand why.
So, I mean, you've been asked probably every question under the sun, and I'll probably be bouncing all over the place with different things. I was kind of hoping you would talk a little bit about it in the beginning stages, because I get a lot of people, asking me why I don't buy in the whole structure, tree snap thing, and all that kind of stuff. Can you tell the history that you know in regards to, I think it was DeHende, you help me with that one, about the tree snap and how...
the twisted trees you're talking about. Yeah. Oh, I know how that began. That was all started by the late Robert Titmus, or Bob Titmus, as he was known. He's a friend of mine and colleague as well. He's passed away. He's been passed away since 1997. He suggested that in Northern California in the mid-1960s, he was known these partially broken off trees and treetops and things like that, twisted. And he wondered if Sasquatch had something to do with that. It was a hypothesis, a question. But through time and retelling and people finding other trees here and there and everywhere, by the time the mid-'80s rolled around, almost every documentary on television was saying twisted trees was a sign left by Sasquatch, as though that was an established fact. Well, that was never established. It was an hypothesis. It was a question, I've seen hundreds of twisted trees, and I've interviewed hundreds of people who say they saw a Sasquatch, but I've yet to talk to anyone, a reliable witness, who claimed to have watched a Sasquatch twist a tree. You know, so it's one of these things that through time and retelling has taken on a life of its own, and in my opinion, it never should have. It never should have. It's still a possibility. I'm not denying Sasquatch does this. I'm just saying we got to have some evidence, because originally it was just a hypothesis. It was a question. Can a Sasquatch do this? Because every time you find a twisted or broken tree, there could be other explanations for it. But too many people come into this today, they say that Sasquatch did that. What else could have done that? Well, you'd be surprised what wind, snow, frost, moose, bears do to young trees. Yeah. When there's something in that tree they want. Yeah. I mean, I saw a moose straddling in Alberta. I saw a moose straddling young trees to get at the shoots of the top. The damn thing twisted and broke while it was straddling it, and of course, a moose wanders off, and there's that broken, twisted tree. Someone comes around now and sees that and say, "Oh, well, look, Sasquatch sign." No. And the same goes for shelters and nests. No one ever bothers to ask why these so-called shelters are only 30 feet off a roadway or cut line. In other words, where people are. Yeah. You know. And one example someone sent me said, "How can you explain this? We found no evidence at all of people being around. Just one old boot 10 feet away that was obviously there a long time because it's half rotted." I said, "Well, you're one up in the Sasquatch. You got evidence of people. The boot." Right. You know. Well, they said, "Well, no one's ever been here before." And I said, "Well, you're there. What makes you think no one else has ever been there?" You know, and this is the kind of thing people assume. Well, no one's ever been in this area before. How do you know that? Were you monitoring every trailhead at the time? How do you know no one's been there in the last 2 weeks? Yeah, and that's totally a good point, because I mean, I remember what it was like back in the 60s and 70s. You know, the atmosphere of your hunting concepts, and you're still kind of attached to being in the forest, and the generation today. And this isn't, you know, a downer on the people who is the generation that's out there now, but I find a lot of people just don't really understand the bush or the rhythm of the bush anymore. We've definitely kind of disengaged from it. So, and then with the narratives that are online, because you've heard me say this too, and so is most people watching, which is, you know, be cautious of the narrative you're hearing on the bloody screen here, because it primes your thinking. You don't know who I am. You've never met me before. And then we have the world's greatest researcher, which is the finger, of course, which I should draw little eyes and a nose on, because it's in every video pointing at Sasquatch. It's the world famous international finger researcher for Bigfoot and Sasquatch. But, you know, and I find it amazing, and how people get so positioned and offended when you're trying to find out, I think we're supposed to be doing this, what is it we're actually looking at, compared to jumping the bandwagon ahead of things and saying, this is a Sasquatch. And I don't know how you stayed involved with this for so long, because I mean, like, it's been over 40 years now, hasn't it? Oh, yeah. 1978 I started. And I mean, when I connected up with you, I was just in it for, I think up at that point online, because that's when I started becoming public online about the topic. I think 3 years, and by the 5th year, I just thought, I don't want to even come online anymore, because the insanity that's online, you know, like, I'm surprised you're not a raging alcoholic, because you've been doing this for 40 years and you don't even drink, which is nice. You got to, well, I made a vow New Year's Eve 1989 after I broke my hand punching a pickup truck, apparently. Oh, nice. Yeah. I don't even remember it. I vowed I'd never touch alcohol again. You know, I never broke it. Never broke it. And the biggest problem with Sasquatch research today is the researchers themselves. So many people that you see online on this, they call themselves researchers, but they're not. They're advocates. They're like religious leaders trying to push a faith, rather than a researcher trying to find an answer. Nice. Right? Yeah. To be a researcher, you have to be willing to admit that in the end, it can turn out that you are wrong. It is quite possible, even though I don't believe it yet. quite possible that in the end, it may turn out the Sasquatch is nothing more than a great piece of Canadian or Western North American mythology and folklore. I don't believe that, but I accept the possibility. So many people that you see who call themselves researchers today, they're like religious leaders. They're totally convinced. They feel it's their responsibility to convince everybody else. And I gave up even caring if the general public believed in the existence of Sasquatch a long time ago. I keep doing this, Leon, for one reason only. I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know.
Yeah.
One way or the other. And if it's not, I don't feel I've wasted my time, because I've done my part to catalog and record a great piece of Western Canadian or North American, with Americans and their Bigfoot, North American folklore mythology. That's assuming the Sasquatch does not exist. Now, if it does exist, well, then it's as far as I'm concerned, it has to be a creature of flesh and blood, an unclassified primate, and its discovery will be the discovery of the 20th and 21st century. Yeah, it'd be wonderful. And
so, do you buy,
just to realize how could we have missed this?
Right. Do you buy there's this cover-up thing?
No, I don't think the government's trying to keep anything a secret or anything like that. I think the government's just doing what governments always do. Until they have solid evidence, they don't really care.
Right.
As long as it's in the realm of mythology and folklore, and officially that's where it is, they don't care. Now, if it is proven to exist, like a bus kills one on the Trans-Canada Highway tomorrow and stuff, and the body's there, the first thing the politicians are going to do is talk to the scientists, and the scientists are going to examine it and say, yes, it is flesh and blood, and it does exist. Then the government will care. But until that happens, we're still at stage one. Yep. Does the Sasquatch exist or not?
Yeah. And I think that's what's been frustrating for me too, is because remember when we first met, I was going up to what was that lake up in Mission where the Sasquatch Mission sighting was, and it was Hoover Lake, and I was all excited, and then of course I stopped in and saw you, and you just blew the wind right out of my sails by telling me, oh yeah, I know the guy that was on there.
Yeah, his name was Brandon Pollock. Yeah.
And you have all these guys online, not all these guys, but certain people online, like Thinker Thunker and that, and you can see that this Sasquatch, or this is obviously a Sasquatch because I can look how it walks down inside of that area, and who can walk like that, and there's two narrative that's attached to it that I bought into for sure, because I want to find a Sasquatch, so I get a little excited. And yeah, you just blew that one right out of the water. But I need to know that. Now, like you said, I need to know when I'm wrong, because I want to find out what's factual. And it's been, I mean, that other story you shared with me, that's, again, I mentioned a little bit on that video there about, we were talking about coyotes making really bizarre sounds, and how, what flats were they called again?
The Chehalis Flats.
Yeah, and the Chehalis Flats there, and how I heard the same sound. And how the people who are accusing you, well, did you get it on tape and get it on video? Well, the people who actually recorded it, they never got it on video, and they're asking you to. And then you asked me if I did, which made me laugh my head off there. Because you want to share a little bit about that story, if you don't mind?
Well, the whole reason it happened, there was this couple that lived in the trailer park. There's actually a neighborhood of houses there next to the flats now that were not, they hadn't started construction on those yet at the time, so only the trailer park was there. And an elderly couple who lived in the trailer park contacted John Green and said, we've got this thing howling out in the flats. And this isn't the first time this kind of thing is reported. I've looked at alleged footprints on the flats too. And there's a long history of sightings and other things along the flats, because it's right outside the Chehalis Reserve, which is where the term Sasquatch was coined in the first place back in 1929. So a long history. This is the area where it all began. Mm. And John Green, the late John Green, suggested to them, well, the next time it happens, put your camcorder out on the patio and record them. And she said, well, why? It's pitch dark. You can't see anything. Yeah, but at least we'll hear what you're talking about. And it did happen again, and they did play it. And there was a recording, and we got all excited. myself, John Green, Jerry Matthews, another fellow whose name has gone out of my head. But we all got excited because they were exactly like famous alleged recordings from the past. The Puyallup recordings of 1969, the Snohomish recordings of 1979, the Klamath River recordings in 1993, recordings that I would have bet money on would eventually be proven to be Sasquatch in origin. And just down the road from there, a year before, these same sort of sounds were heard, and I heard it myself by another lady in another trailer park, and that's another reason I was so excited, because they were exactly the same. I thought, well, we got one. Obviously, we probably got a Sasquatch that's moved back in the area. Well, one morning, 2004, Jerry Matthews and myself were out in the flats looking once again. We heard the sounds. We went rushing in their direction. Unbelievable. We're going to see it now. This is it. We've got it. And we did. We saw it. There was a coyote. It looked like invisible hands were squeezing this animal's guts and was letting out these incredible cries. And I thought I knew every sound a coyote made. Hell, they've been around. I've lived among them my whole life. Back in Waterville, Alberta, me and my ex-wife used to sit out on the porch at night and listen to them. It was like a serenade going off all over the place. Coyotes everywhere. They're all over the place here. I got them in my yard. I'd never heard a coyote make this type of sound before. And what happened, a second coyote came bounding out of the bush, and they both reverted back to that familiar yip, yip, yipping sound we've heard a million times and are familiar with. And they went off like happy puppies, jumping all over each other. It looked like a happy reunion. They went running off down the flats towards Morris Valley Road before we lost sight of them. And I thought, damn. At the time, well, I'm glad we discovered what made the sound. I'm just not happy with the conclusion. I said, yeah, you're right. I said, you know, this, not only did I think we explained away the Chehalis sounds, but I think we've also explained away the Puyallup recordings in 1969, the Snohomish recordings in 1979, and the Klamath recordings in 1993 that people have been taken out on expeditions all over the states and call blasting with. And what I think it is just a rarely heard location cry that coyotes use that you don't often see, because when they see each other and they're in view of each other, they have that familiar yip, yip, yipping type call all the time. But this was something like another coyote was nowhere in sight and was trying to contact it. The second coyote never answered. It just came running towards it. And I think it's a rarely heard location cry by coyotes. So half the time I think people are using these on their so-called call blasting expedition. They're just getting coyotes calling back, and they don't even know it. And when I released this, like when I announced our findings on this case, the Chehalis Sounds, 2004, 2006, boy, were there a lot of people and fellow researchers who used these sounds and that just didn't want to hear it. Guys I knew and respected, like John Freitas and stuff like that, they did not want to hear it. I had even people suggesting it was a Sasquatch imitating a coyote. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I thought, my God, you're willing to accept the Sasquatch, you want to accept a coyote? That's a little strange to me, but yeah, you know.
Well, especially with three of us now seeing a Sasquatch, seeing a coyote doing that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we've seen it now. And I mean, I seen mine, almost 10 years, 15 years after you saw the same, or had the same experience. So there's got to be, I don't know, again, this whole craziness that has gone through. And I do believe it's getting better, especially the younger generation, because they just don't put up with it. And we've been online so much, looking at structures and the sacred explorer, the finger pointing and narrating that this is it. But no one ever says why specifically it is for sure a Sasquatch that is doing it, and why would a Sasquatch do it. And actually know that data needed to vet the information for us viewers at home that we get. Okay, well, that makes sense. But
yeah, well, to him, it probably is a Sasquatch in his mind. You know, but as Rennie once said, I don't care about Sasquatch in his goddamn mind. I want to see Sasquatch out there in the bush. You know, and he's absolutely right. And I can say this right now, and I'll say it to all your listeners and viewers. I mean, any photographic or video evidence where the image is open to interpretation as evidence, it's just been rendered useless.
Right.
Even if it was a Sasquatch. If you have to point out what people are saying and tell them what they're saying, they're seeing, then you're seeing nothing. Because the evidence just went out the window. Yeah. They weren't there with me. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? It's got to be Patterson film, Gimlin film quality or better. And even that, I don't think will convince the scientific, i.e. the political world, that Sasquatch even exists.
Yeah. And there's just, again, it's just so tough. We're not in the forest at all in the chunks of time we're needing to be in the forest. You know, like I appreciate Justin from Mountain Beast Mysteries. I mean, he's in there for a month or so, a month and a half, I think, in that new area he's researching and stuff. And he's in there by himself. And those are the kind of people that I appreciate, because, you know, at my age and your age, we have to stick next to, not go into the deep bush like we used to do in the old days. But there were some things I wanted to ask you too about some of the frustrating garbage that you have heard online. Could you kind of break some of that down? Like, yeah, I'm sure you listened to this whole massacre thing that came out with.
Oh, please.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I mean, even though 10 years ago it was kind of vetted already that it was just garbage, but
well, this guy, I keep forgetting his name, but he goes by on YouTube as the title "How to Hunt."
Oh, Steve LaBelle or something like that.
Yeah, he brought it all up again and got him going. And MK Davis has been pushing this massacre nonsense. It's garbage. There's nothing to it. We pointed that out back in 2009, and the late Bill Miller and myself put together an article just blowing the claim right out the water as far as I was concerned, but it keeps coming up, and for some reason there are a lot of people who want to believe it. I mean, you have to face the fact. There's a lot of gullible people out there that almost believe anything. You know, I could start a religion tomorrow for the worship of bowling balls, and I bet you within a month I'd have 40 followers. You know, the scariest thing is these people are allowed to vote.
Yeah. Well, the weird thing too is you probably have more subscribers on your channel and viewers.
Yeah.
Because if you are scientifically based and data collecting, people don't, you know, and I mean, again, for me, I've never been online to have lots of viewers, and I'm really appreciating, you know, I think I have a few more now, like 890, but I mean, I don't need 890, even though I appreciate that this new narrative's getting out there, and more people are appreciating and saying, you know, thank goodness we're getting more people like these channels that are saying what it actually is. So we stop wasting, my goodness, we have wasted a lot of energy and time and finances, money on not the right data. And especially when it comes to structures and that. And it's kind of like a weekend warrior, but weekend warrior Sasquatch is looking for structures and hanging out, community, and there's really nothing wrong with that. But if it turns out that the structures like the ones we have here in the Okanagan, where I had to do that gullible white guy looking for Sasquatch video, you know, I had to fess up on that whole thing. Sorry, Thomas, I'm recovering there from that COVID lockdown I was on. In case you see me coughing too much. But, and no, for someone who was online the other day who says, oh, nice smoker's cough, I thought, man, that's another funny thing, how people jump right on you as soon as you're online, right? They have no idea who you are, and they project onto you as if they know everything about you.
Well, yeah, I know. And they don't attack the argument, they attack you, so they've already lost the argument.
Yes.
Yeah, so that goes on all the time. I mean, again, people like Todd Standing and Randy Brisson and other people who, as far as I'm concerned, are just blowing it out both ends. They're just making stuff up as they go. They have their legion of followers, and they always will. And no amount of, and people say, well, prove that he's making up. I said, I got better things to do than follow Todd Standing around. I'm trying to find evidence for the Sasquatch. You want to believe him, you go right ahead.
Right.
Yeah. You go on chasing your tail. I just personally don't care. I know what my opinion, and I'm going to state it. And if Todd Standing were to come across a Sasquatch tomorrow, I'd praise him up and down, because he does go out in the bush. Who knows? Maybe he'll get lucky. I mean, Roger Patterson, I believe he actually filmed the Sasquatch on October 20th, 1967, but Roger Patterson was not a trustworthy person in real life. He was what I know of, I never met him. The poor guy died of Hodgkin's disease in 1972, but I've known Bob Gimlin for many decades, and we're good friends. And he's sort of confirmed. I kind of picture in the Yakima area, Roger Patterson was kind of like the character on the old Green Acres show, Mr. Haney. You know, everybody liked them. Most people liked him, but everyone sort of knew, for God's sakes, don't give him any money because you'll never get it back. And that's the kind of guy he was, right?
Right.
It doesn't make, and he spent a lot of his time, even though he was dying, looking for evidence of the Sasquatch, because he got the buck. The year before he got the film, he published a book called "Do Abominable Snowmen in North America Really Exist?" So he was right in there with the original crowd, the old guard. And he was up with Bob Gimlin in the Mount St. Helens region. He got a phone call saying something's happened in Northern California, which was the Blue Creek Mountain Tracks. He went down there with Bob. Bob's time, Bob's money, Bob's gas, Bob's food. When they just got, either if the Sasquatch exists, they got the luckiest day you could ask for, and they got film footage to back it up, right? Yeah. If it doesn't exist, it's the greatest hoax ever pulled on the public. Yeah.
Well, and I always joke about the person who probably is going to find it is somebody who's not even interested in it. He goes into the bush for the first time in his entire life.
Yeah.
Drops his keys on the ground, looks down, and there's a bone or something there. Digs around.
It's like you spend 2 or 3 days, 30 miles back in the bush in the middle of nowhere, not finding anything. And then you find out there was a sighting just outside someone's backyard. 6 blocks from your own house. You know?
Yeah. Hey, what was one of the most interesting investigations you went on?
Well, I think the most interesting case, and I still think it's my favorite, was the Bald Bear Creek incident of 1986, August of 1986. It's better known as the Chilliwack River find, because for years we couldn't find out what the actual name of that little feeder stream was. It's actually Bald Bear Creek. For years I called it Cow Creek. And sometimes it was called Cattle Creek or Kettle Creek. No one seemed to really know, but then we found out it was Bald Bear Creek. A buddy of mine named Jason found that out like in 20 minutes that I couldn't find out in 30 years. Yeah. Because he knows where to look on the internet to find information. Me, I was looking at books and maps and charts.
Books? What are those?
Yeah, that's those things up there.
What's a map again?
Yeah.
You got pins in.
Yeah, but an American couple was from Salt Lake City named Harris were on a fishing vacation. They were down on the river fishing, and all he remembered was looking over his wife, and she's looking back at their campsite pointing, and he looked up and he saw this large, what he described as a large gorilla-like thing, sniffing fish they had hanging from a gill stringer on a hook that at night they hung their lantern on. They had a gill stringer of about 4 or 5 trout on that. It took it and just snapped it right off the hook and went running across through their campsite, and it crossed the main road and disappeared along the banks of Bald Bear Creek. The main road back then was still a dirt road. It's paved now. The recreation is now called Riverside Recreation Area. I don't believe in 1986 it was even named. But I found out about it because this fellow came up to me in town because he saw the sign of my vehicle, and he told me about something that just happened. And I think he's the guy that came running towards him after turning. He saw it too. And he said to them, "What the hell was that?" And I don't know what to say. And he came into town, and he ran, and I think I met up with him. I'm pretty sure he was the same guy. There were 2 other guys in the campground too at the far end. And when I went to talk and interview the witnesses there, I kind of wondered, did these 2 other guys pull something? Because they were kind of snickering about the whole thing, as I recall. But I went down across the road along the banks of Bald Bear Creek. The witnesses didn't. As a matter of fact, if I had been 15 seconds later, I would have missed them. Because I pulled into the exit of the campground and ran into this red pickup truck with a camper on it with Utah license plates, and it was them. They were just leaving. And I said, "Do you know anything about this creature that was seen?" And she says, "Oh, you mean the Bigfoot?" And he looked at her like, "Shut up." But after I calmed them down and stuff like that and told them what I did, they put off their leaving for an hour and a half or so. They told me the whole story. And then they left because they were planning on driving all across southern British Columbia and going up to Banff, Alberta, and places like that before heading back home to the United States. So I went and I looked across the road along the banks of Bald Bear Creek, and that's when I found the tracks. The witnesses never saw them or never knew they were there. And right down by the creek bank, when the soft spots, that's where there were discernible footprints. And you could see where it went off through the grass and stuff. It was just basically marks in the grass, right? But I counted them because there was one spot under a bunch of old growth trees where it looked like it was milling about. It was like they weren't in a straight line. They were just all over, haphazard, all over. Kind of reminded me, like, I thought of it at the time, like a man looking for his keys. Like he dropped his car keys. He's trying to find them on the ground. And I think, assuming it did happen, it was a Sasquatch, that the thing had stopped and was watching and was observing to see if it was being followed. And eventually the trail went back in almost in the same direction it had before it got to this area under these old growth trees, and they disappeared at the bottom of a large rock slide at the base of Ford Mountain. And some of these boulders were like the size of Volkswagen Beetles, right? They were huge rocks, some of them even bigger. And I never found anywhere. I stayed 3 days there, and I never found any place where they had come out either on the side, the front, or the top. And I never found the fish stringer, too. That would have been nice to find, but I never found it. And so where it went once it entered the rock-strewn side of Ford Mountain, I have no idea. But it's one of the most fascinating accounts I've ever looked into, and I still wonder about it.
Did you take? I think you took casts, didn't you? Or did you?
I took 2 casts, one of which I lost eventually because this was the first time. It wasn't the first time I ever saw footprints, because this was the first time I ever really tried to cast one. And, you know, even though it says in the box, first I was amazed how much plaster of Paris it took to fill one footprint, because I was buying these little milk cartons of plaster of Paris at the time rather than the big bags, right?
Yep.
Oh, this should be enough. No. So I had enough to cast 2 prints. And when it says, oh, you got to wait 20 minutes before pulling out, no, wait at least an hour. I gave mine an hour and a half nowadays, right? At least, no matter what the conditions are, before trying to pull out. Because the first one I tried to pull out after about 20, 25 minutes, and it basically broke apart on me. So I learned that the hard way. Yeah.
How do you tell, just for people at home, because you give me some good insights there, when you're looking at a track, how can you tell if the track's in motion compared to when it's standing?
Well, certain things, like when it's moving out and stuff, like the Parrish and Gilman film location is an excellent example of this. Roger only cast two tracks the day that he shot the film. And being Roger, he picked what he thought was the most clear and distinct ones, the ones down close to the water. Now, it was Titmus who came by 9 days later and cast 10 of the tracks in succession. And he cast what is known as the Laverty track, because Lyle Laverty actually photographed it.
Right.
It's the one with what's example of mid-tarsal break I've ever seen. I showed those to you when you were here. I could show them to you now, but I have to dig them out.
No, that's okay. We can save it for another time. But yeah, because that's what I remember asking. So what was the difference between the two? Like,
well, again, the where it was stationary, there was no mid-tarsal break. It was rather flat-footed, but as it stepped out and sped up, you could see whole kinds of variances in the tracks and toe movement as well, and especially that mid-tarsal break where the heel comes down, then the front foot comes down, pushes back a mound of dirt in the middle of the foot before it takes off again, right? And, of course, it pushes a little bit back on the toes when it takes off again. When it's standing still, you don't see that. So when it's moving, I mean, we do that kind of a little bit, too, when we're walking. If you're standing still, you'll notice a difference in your footprints than when you're moving and when you're running, you know, that kind of thing, yeah.
And the thing, too, I didn't get a chance to ask you this before, is how many reports have you investigated? Because your map on your wall there looks like hundreds and hundreds of coded pins on it there.
Well,
I don't want to set you up because maybe it's not hundreds. I'm just.
Well, it's a lot. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Put it this way. I got my file book here, British Columbia. I'm on case 220. That's British Columbia. Alberta, I think there's about between 80 and 100, and other areas, Washington, Oregon, I got files full of stuff there too. Geez, I don't know, but a lot.
And did you find this year, Thomas, because I really noticed that the reports for our area, because of the smoke that was up here this year, really could knock down any reports hardly at all for us this year. Actually, I got somebody yesterday contacted me, which is great. But how about yourself? I think last time I talked on the phone, you were just heading out because you had finally a report or something that had come in. Have you noticed that?
I had two reports along the Harrison River, one on the east side and one down near almost where the resort is. But unfortunately, both these cases, the witness, when they found out what I was and what I did, didn't want to talk about it anymore.
Mm.
I've had a number of reports of footprints this year that were found. I've looked into that. I think there could be other explanations for. But there was one case that just came out on September 21st in Golden Ears Park. I call him Mr. O, but he's actually a doctor. And he wants complete confidentiality in this. And I actually posted a little video I shot on the scene there on my blog site. And he was just driving into, it was a Monday, so the park was basically empty. And there's only one road in, one road out. And he was heading to the Long Beach area to do some hiking. And he was 8.6 kilometers in, just approaching a sign that warns of a horse crossing, because there's horse trails for people who ride. When he just happened to glance his rearview mirror, and he saw this thing cross the road behind him. Hmm. And he said it crossed the road in like 2 strides, stride and a half, which would be like 3 steps, right? And just disappeared. And he said it was massive. And he actually stopped, turned around, came back, and tried to see it again, but he looked into the trees, but he couldn't see anything, and he never saw it again. And he wondered about it. He wondered about it. He wondered about it. He told his sister about it, apparently, and she told him, "Don't tell anyone about it. Don't tell me." He thought he should, so he looked at some local things, and I can't remember who referenced him to me. I think it was Jerry Matthews, who ran the West Coast Sasquatch. He told him about me, would contact me, and he called me and he told me what happened. He still thinks, he actually thinks in his mind that maybe he was hoaxed, that someone pulled something. Mm. He just doesn't want to think that the Sasquatch is out there. He knows about the Sasquatch. He's been in British Columbia in the Maple Ridge area his whole life. He's heard stories his whole life, but he never believed in it. And part of him still doesn't want to believe in it. And he thinks, well, maybe someone pulled something. But he said it was huge. Mm. And he thought it was rather feminine. And I said, why? He said, because of the way it walked. And I said, what do you mean? Did you see any breasts or anything? He said, no. Well, and he said, that's just what went in my head. I thought it was a great, big, ugly woman in a fur coat. That's the way he described it. I don't know why, he said, but I think it could have been female or a woman in a costume. Well, how tall was she? About 8 feet. Who knows? There were certain marks in the ground and scuff marks in the area off the side of the road, but nothing that could be described as declared footprints. See, British Columbia is a horrible place to try and find trails. Yeah.
Well, I don't understand, like some of the places you took me to and that, I look at your guys' forest there. I mean, here it's mostly lodgepole pine, so at least you can negotiate through it. But yeah, you get closer to where you're at there and on the coast, and it's like, it's just thick.
Tiger jungle, yeah.
Yeah. Tiger jungle, totally.
Yeah, tiger jungle. And that's because most of the forest down here is actually second and third growth. All the old growth has been down, at least down by the riverbanks, has been logged through the decades. And once they get big again, it becomes easier to get through. But when it's in that stage, you get the leaf trees coming up, and eventually the cedars and the firs get big, and they drown those smaller trees out and stuff like that. But that takes a lot of years for that to happen.
Right.
Yeah, but the moss, it's just so spongy, and anything that walks on it, you almost watch if you look. You just you walk through there in the early morning and watch as the afternoon heat comes in, the mist disappears and stuff. You actually see your mark on the ground recover, and it's gone. Yeah. Used to be a joke in the old days. If you want to see a Sasquatch, go to British Columbia. If you want to see its tracks, go to Northern California. Because Northern California had a bad habit of not doing anything to harden their Forest Service roads. So you always had that layer of dust about an inch thick on the roads. Was it played havoc with vehicle air intakes, but it was great for tracks. It's not that way anymore. California now does treat their Forest Service roads, but they didn't back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? So there was a lot of tracks found at the time, especially in the Bluff Creek region. But here in British Columbia, they're not dirt roads at all. They're rock-strewn forest, rain-soaked, rain-washed rock roads that unless something steps in that muddy spot right there, it's not going to leave a track at all.
Yeah. We're a little bit, we have a definite advantage in the Okanagan because there's a lot of sand and silt.
Yeah.
And it's easier to see tracks here definitely than there. Thomas, I don't want to keep us too much. I mean, I know you and I can just talk, but we can do that another time online. But I did want to ask a couple of questions. One question is, what's the number one rule?
For a researcher, you mean?
Yeah.
Thou shalt not hoax. Not ever. For any reason, not even as a joke. Thou shalt not hoax. Because you do, you get caught, your credibility is gone forever. Never, ever hoax, never participate in a hoax. As a matter of fact, part of your job is exposing hoaxes. Right. And if you want to get involved in research, I don't know if this is part of your question, but drop the philosophy I've always lived by. Stick to the facts and never deviate from the facts.
And what should a researcher always have with him when he's out in the bush?
Not just a researcher, anybody. Camera. Never, ever go anywhere. I don't care if you're just going through a section of town to get to the KFC store. Take your camera with you, okay? If you have to get up and if you're camping in a campground and you have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to the outhouse, take your camera with you. You know, I don't care if it's a cell phone or a little Instamatic or a little one of those old 35 millimeter wind-up ones you used to be able to buy in the store, or the most expensive camera you can buy. But take a camera with you, because if you see something and you don't get a picture of it, you're just another person who says he saw a Sasquatch, and we don't know if you're telling the truth. Yeah.
And the next question I have for you is, you think we'll get them on film with the technology we're getting today?
I hope so. I'd love it if there was. I personally can't understand it why we haven't. I mean, one of the biggest criticism I have was, like I said, I spent a lot of years in Alberta, Western Alberta, so I had a lot of contacts in Banff National Park and Jasper National Park. And I was there when they didn't have the wildlife fences on the side of the road, and they had a horrible time with that, trying to get people to slow down because it was terrible. They had for a year they ran what was called the red flag program, and it was awful. You go through the park and there's hundreds of these red flags. Everything from a squirrel to an elk to a grizzly bear had been killed by moving vehicles because people wouldn't slow down. So they finally gave up on that, and they decided to build wildlife fences like what we got in the Coquihalla. And they built wildlife tunnels. And after the wildlife tunnels, they built overpasses covered in trees and stuff. Well, this has been going on since the late 1980s, and they have put cameras on those overpasses in those tunnels, and you can see a lot of this on YouTube. It bothers the hell out of me that in the years since the late 1980s till now, they have got footage of every large animal you can think of that exists in the Rocky Mountain foothills. Grizzly bears, elk, deer, moose, black bear, cougars, lynx, bobcat, everything, raccoons. But they haven't got a photograph. They haven't got footage of a Sasquatch. I mean, Sasquatch has to cross the highway too to get from one end of the park to the other. It bothers me that something like that doesn't pick up. The only out they have is the cameras are not 24-hour, 365-day a year. You know, they're put out for a week here and a week there. But I keep pointing out they have got footage of everything, even some pretty strange people. They've got footage of everything. But they've got nothing on the Sasquatch, and that bothers me because why? I mean, that bothers me. Why? I had a suggestion years ago if I had unlimited funding, what would I do? And I had what it was called the Coca-Cola Project.
Yep.
Which was a solar-powered trip camera at all the wildlife underpasses and all the river and creek underpasses, anything big enough for a man to get through. And we run those cameras 24/7, 365 days a year, and for however long it takes to get footage of every large animal, raccoon size or bigger, that we know is there. We don't get footage of a Sasquatch, then that will convince me that there's no Sasquatch to get.
Yep.
Because people who say, "Oh, the Sasquatch went through when the cameras weren't there." I mean, in Banff National Park, where they have been videotaping, that is still a relevant excuse, but it's getting to be a slim one.
Yep. No, and we were talking because I remember you mentioned this to me 3 years ago, and I was talking to some people about in with Alberta Sasquatch, getting together with those guys and saying, you guys do your side of the mountain and I'll do our side of the mountain in those locations that you're sharing. Because yeah, it's totally fun. The drawback is, unfortunately, like you said, it's even to get out there in the wintertime in some of these areas, because you need them running 24/7, 7 days a week for 365 days of the year. And it's like the highway cams, at least you can check in the highway cams anytime you want, but those ones even go down in regards to that. But that's basically the setup you're looking for sure. What else was I going to ask? I think I'll hold off on some of that stuff right now for you guys. Viewing at home there, I'll have a whole bunch of links underneath here, I'll include Thomas's books on here as well. I need to ask this one question because somebody asked me and I wanted to find out who the source was, and I thought it was from one of your books. I had heard that the Alberta Sasquatch is about a foot bigger. It seems to be larger than the BC one. Have you heard that?
No, I think what they're basing that on is I definitely feel the Sasquatch in Alberta has got to be a hardier animal to get through the winters there.
Yeah, totally.
It's brutal. I mean, the roads quite often, like the 940 trunk road, is usually still blocked by snow in mid-June. I mean,
and minus 50, minus 50. But last time I lived in Alberta, 22 days, minus 50 with the wind chill. How does anything live in that weather?
Yeah, and someone also said in the West Coast the females seem to be bigger than males. I don't know where that came from.
That is from the it's the tribe.
Actually, you said that.
I did say that because I actually, if you go on my Facebook page, you'll see a documentary from the. I'm going to screw up the name again. Nagis, up in Port. Anyways, it's on that doc. If you go on my Facebook page, there's a documentary up there for the First Nations. They're the ones who said that. Mm-hmm. They suggested that it's a lot. The female's larger than the male was.
In the West Coast here, if you go by First Nation, all the history and tradition, the female is definitely a lot more dangerous.
Yeah.
Than the males. Matter of fact, the name Sasquatch means cannibal woman.
Yes.
Loosely translated. And the Bukwas was the male. The Bukwas was more benign, whereas the Sasquatch will get you if you don't watch out.
That's
in other
right.
words, wacky women. But that's for the size in Alberta. There was a rash of reports in around the Bighorn Dam and the Abraham Lake area between 1948 and 1984. And of course, the lake wasn't there because the Kootenai Plains hadn't been flooded yet because the Bighorn Dam was built in 1969.
Right.
People reporting extreme height reports. You had normal height reports at the same time, 6, 7, 8 feet tall. But for some reason, between 1948 and 1984, there was a whole rash of people reporting 12, 13, 14, and of course, the Bighorn Dam is 15-foot tall individuals. At least that's what the people were. Ronald Gamel driving along Abraham Lake, watched 3 of them cross the road. He said every damn one of them was over 12 feet tall.
Wow.
But what I found interesting was all these extreme height reports were all in the same general area, like an 80-mile circle around Abraham Lake and the Bighorn Dam. The first one I got is from 1948, and the last one I got was 1984. After 1984, suddenly the extreme height reports in Alberta stopped, at least as far as I know. Remember, I left Alberta in 2002.
Right.
But normal height reports, 6, 7, 8 feet tall, continued. Now, what was this? Just a batch of creatures that were extremely big that lived out their lives and passed on? Who knows? I just find that people were overestimating the heights. Why were all the estimations in the same general vicinity? Right? That was interesting to me.
Yeah,
and we've had a few here. I got a report a couple years ago in 2012, just east of town here. A fellow coming back from what he called an end of the world party. Remember, end of the world party? 2012, the Mayan calendar thing.
Yeah.
And he was coming back around midnight, and he said he saw this thing stand up that was sitting on the side of the road and actually walk into a person's yard, and this person had a big overhang, beam overhang at the entrance, and that overhang is 12 feet tall, and he said it had to duck to get under it. So who knows? I think the average height for a Sasquatch is probably 6, 7, 8 feet tall, but like humans, every now and then you get one that's really big.
Right.
Yeah. Or it could be overestimation and the excitement of the moment, but it's very interesting in Alberta that all these overestimations occurred in the same general area.
Yeah, it could be a genetic thing. Could be a genetic thing too for them.
Could be, yeah.
Who's the buddy on your right hand shoulder there?
Oh, this is Gigantopithecus black-eye, which was a huge Asian ape that probably went extinct about a million years ago, maybe, or actually some say a million years ago, some say as recently as 10,000 years ago. But the theory is that this old boy, probably when he was alive, probably migrated across the Bering Land Bridge at the same time the ancestors of our First Nation people did. And Sasquatch is simply this species continuing, right? I don't know if I agree with that 100%, but to me, that's the one that makes the most sense. And it was the late Grover Krantz that came up with the hypothesis that Gigantopithecus was an erect biped. And he based that on the fact that the lower mandible, which right here.
Look at that jaw. Yeah. Holy smokes.
Seems to be very wide.
Yeah.
Whereas most chimps and gorillas have a very narrow jaw, lower jaw, because they're quadruped. The head is forward of the body.
Right.
But this is more similar to ours because, and the only reason for that is that he felt that the neck is in the way, which suggests that perhaps Gigantopithecus black-eye was an erect biped, at least at times, right? Now, other people say no, Gigantopithecus was not an erect biped, it was quadruped. Maybe it was. Maybe it was both. It's like the reports of the Yeti in the Himalayas. There are reports of it being bipedal, and there's a lot of reports of it being quadrupedal. The Sasquatch is always bipedal, most of the time, unless some people saw it climbing up a steep hill or something that's using its hands to assist. But that's the hypothesis. It's a hypothesis to me that probably makes the most sense to explain what the Sasquatch is in the fossil record. But hey, it's just an hypothesis. It could be totally wrong. Yeah.
Well, Thomas, what do you have coming up on the future there? Are you on any podcasts or on any other shows that are coming up?
I'm supposed to do something tomorrow night on a blog talk program with let me see. Getting names. Well, I'm going to be doing a documentary with Omni Films.
Right.
And then we're going to be out next week and doing that, another documentary film. Supposed to go up along the Anderson River again, just searching. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to do a podcast, but this is going to be audio only. I can't remember the name of the show just off. I wrote it down. Talking All Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a podcast program. Larry Baxton's show.
Okay.
Yeah, and he will be talking about Sasquatch there. Larry's kind of a guy who likes to grill people, and suppose he's going to try and step me up, I suppose.
I know, Larry.
Yeah, he's going to try and step me up, so I'll be doing that tomorrow night.
Nice.
Another show, and of course I'm going out all the time and just looking and trying to find something.
Yep.
And I just carry on. I'm 59 years old. I'm not going to quit now. I know.
You're 2 years older than I am. We'll have to get matching Sasquatch walkers when we're in the nursery.
I'd just be happy if someone would come back from the pearly gates. I mean, give me a ghost call on the phone. I mean, you guys know the truth now. Just let me know one way or the other. Yeah. Like I said, my buddy and colleague Bill Miller just passed away October 1st. And, of course, John Green's gone now, and Renee's gone now. And I like to think these guys now know the truth, and they're probably laughing at me saying, figure it out for yourself. But, you know, I just want to know. Like I said, I do this now because I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to know. Does the Sasquatch indeed exist or doesn't it? And if, you know, then I'd probably be happy with that.
Yeah. Well, I think the younger generation with technology, we have a lot higher chance now than what we've had. So I totally appreciate talking with you, Thomas.
Oh, my pleasure, Alan. My pleasure.
And like
Sasquatch Okanagan.
When I picked Bigfoot Okanagan, Facebook wouldn't allow me to use the name of Bigfoot Okanagan because they thought it was a foot fetish site.
God knows what they think of the word Sasquatch. How they miss it.
Well, I tried Sasquatch, but it kept rejecting it. I don't know why, and that's why I had to go to Bigfoot Okanagan. But I hope to see you again soon online, and also get you online on some other sites that have been asking me, can you get Thomas on? I said, well, I'll talk to him, and I know you're always open to it. And I think, and again, like I mentioned, I've so much appreciated the way you think. I mean, the other interesting thing is you know everybody by name. And not only do you know everybody by name, the other thing that impressed me when I was seeing you was you follow these people, some of them for their entire lives. You know, when they die, you became friends with their families, some of these witnesses. And that's a great researcher. You're not just there for that. You're actually there for the long term with them. But that's all I wanted to share with you tonight. And I really appreciate you, Thomas, and I think it's important that your voice is out online again.
Well, thank you. Hopefully next time I won't spend 30 minutes trying to figure out I have to put a button on here to get my mic to work.
That's all part of this learning curve.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I'm going to just shut off here, but we'll stay online and chat for just a bit more, if that's all right with you.
Roger that.
Awesome. Thanks, Thomas.
No,
Thanks, everybody.